3002.
We're getting all of our people who want to pass.
Good evening, everyone. At this time, I would like to call to order the regular meeting of Gahanna City Council for November 1st and ask for the invocation and pledge by Mrs. McGregor.
Father God, we ask your wisdom as we decide the issues for the city of Gahanna this evening. We also ask your continued protection on the men and women of our police and armed forces. Amen.
Amen.
The pledge.
Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Roll call, please.
Andrew. Bowers. Here. Lyric.
Here.
Leesburg. McGregor.
Here.
Renner.
Here.
Schnetzer.
Here. One second. Are there any additions or corrections to the agenda this evening? None appearing. Hearing of visitors. Do we have any visitor slips this evening?
We have none.
No. And presentations. Spurry. Oh, I'm sorry. 1 second. Presentations. Yep. We're good.
Joanne, you
Yeah.
okay? If I could, Council President, before Director Burry begins, I'd like to introduce to you the latest member of our finance team, Corey Weibensinger. Joined us a few weeks ago. I mentioned him at a council meeting. He is our new finance manager. He's a Gahanna resident. Comes to us previously as the deputy director for Franklin County Jobs and Family Services. So he's already proved to be an integral part of our presentation tonight, and wanted to make sure you had an opportunity to meet him in person, and hopefully we get a chance to speak with him following the meeting. Thank you.
Okay, good evening, everybody. Hope everybody had a nice weekend. We're going to have a high-level presentation of the 2022 proposed budget. We will take comment and questions at the end of the presentation. We'll try to address the ones that we can tonight. The others we will bring prepared for committee, the next committee of the whole. So things we're going to discuss tonight, we're going to have a brief discussion about the factors that influenced the 2022 budget. We'll have an entity-wide or city-wide analysis of the 2022 budget request. Then we'll kind of lower the scope to a general fund overview, capital maintenance and improvements, the ARP funding request, and then discussing at the end the public safety, parks and recreation, and public service funds overview. So the factors that influenced the 2022 budget were at the forefront of the decisions that we made were recovery from the pandemic. It's unclear when it's going to officially be declared over. There are still continued concerns over variants and low vaccination rates. On the economic side, there's good movement. However, some of the indicators are still not at pre-pandemic levels. We also have some inventory bottlenecks and labor market shortages that are causing wages and inflation to bump up, but as these things are kind of worked out, those will kind of slow also. On the good news side of that is initial forecasts did not predict any type of recovery until after 2023. Those models have been updated now, and they're showing recovery to begin in 2023 leading into 2024. So what did that mean for 2022 as we looked at the budget? This was mainly on the revenue side and really holding steady with little or no growth. And then we also requested various projects from the ARP funds to kind of keep that recovery and growth moving forward. The next thing was strategic and capital planning. As Go Forward Gahanna is reaching the end of its initial 5-year period, refresh is underway. The refresh will take the income tax rate increase, new risks associated with the pandemic, city facilities and other items our residents, council, and the administration identify as important to accomplish over the next 5-year period to keep Gahanna strong and growing. Also new for the city and also underway is an official capital improvement plan. With a 75% of the 1% increase restricted for capital, very important to have a long-term plan for these valuable resources. The city facility plan will also be included in that capital improvement plan. And while we've been working on this, the work on the refresh, the capital improvement plan, and the assessment of city facilities will continue into 2022. So we do have appropriations included to finalize those items and create a successful path forward for the city, as well as address some of the long-standing deficiencies in the city's facilities that just can't be postponed any longer. Next thing was revenue stability and what happens post-pandemic. So as recovery continues, monitoring the revenue after the pandemic and getting those post-pandemic trends will be very important. What's going to happen with work from home? Will it increase, and what does that mean for withholding income taxes? There'll be additional refunds, not just from work from home, but there'll be some 2021 refunds based on the way that employers withheld in 2020 and 2021. And there's also the pending litigation that may increase our refunds also. So while these have a little bit of a negative, or could potentially have a little bit of a negative impact, we also have a fully staffed development department. Our planning department has a full year as a new department under their belt. These two departments are the key role in the economic success of the city, and they've already created some positive momentum in 2021. And as Central Ohio grows, it'll be the expertise of these two departments that'll help us capitalize on some of that growth and keep economic growth moving. So we have kind of uncertainties and unknowns and kind of knowing that we're going to see some economic growth within the city. So with that, we've kind of left everything, again, flat on the income tax side, just staying steady based on adjusted 2021 numbers. The next thing that we looked at was staff and a workload balance. Except for the finance department and police department, all the departments are under new leadership beginning in 2020. And leading up to the income tax increase, many were understaffed. It also didn't take into consideration the increase in projects and new programs that came online, like the rental code and the sidewalk program. In 2020, the plan was to begin hiring and filling these gaps, but then the pandemic hit. We kind of slowed things down and deferred a lot of these until 2021. So while we did have some additional hiring in 2021, giving those departments the human resources they needed, it still didn't quite meet the additional services and projects. So the 2022 appropriation request includes a request for additional staffing in most departments to meet the demands for those services appropriately. And in looking at the budget book, if you refer to the all funds summary on page 34, and also in the department narratives, which begin on page 55, it gives details as to what those new staffing requests are and why they're being requested. The final thing that we looked at was attracting and retaining human capital. So we know we want to bring some new ones on board. We know we want to keep the talent that we have. So in 2021, the city contracted with Clemens Nelson to perform a comprehensive compensation study. The purpose was to ensure we are compensating employees in line with market trends, to retain current talent, and to attract the new ones with the appropriate qualifications. You know, as we talked about the shrinking labor market, this will be one of those things that will be very important to consider, as there's not a lot of resources out there floating around, and we want to make sure that we get the best that we can. The study also looked at compression between supervisory staff and those that they're supervising to make sure that our supervisory personnel are being compensated equitably. So based on this compensation study, there are various employees that were recommended by Clemens Nelson for an increase. And the compensation study is located in the description of that is in the all funds summary on page 37. Sorry about the runny nose, cold weather, getting my sinuses going. So now that we've kind of talked about what influenced our decisions, what factors did we consider, now we'll start looking at our request. First starting with that entity-wide or city-wide view and starting with revenues. So in total, revenues are projected to increase by 3% or $2.5 million. But there are a couple anomalies in this particular budget related to accounting standards and how the ARP funds need to be handled, and also some reclassifications from special funds to the general fund that need to be kind of looked at. So this first glance is with all those things considered. So for the reclassification of activities, in 2021, we were able to take the Recreation Division and the General Services Division of the Parks and Recreation Department and the Public Service Department and move those to the special funds. We started 2021 with a pretty large unreserved balance in those funds because in 2020 we collected more income tax than anticipated, and we had a reduction in expenditures based on cancellations and programs that just didn't occur. So we pulled those into those special funds in 2021. When we look into 2022, there's just not adequate resources for those to stay there, so we're pulling them back in to the general fund. When it comes to the ARP funds, so I have federal grant requirements and I have accounting standards, and I have to make sure I'm meeting both of them. So the federal requirements for the funding says you have to create a special fund. The grant money goes into there. Accounting standards, when they look at the proprietary funds and things that you are going to fund with grants, they state that you should keep all those costs contained within those proprietary funds. You don't want to pay for proprietary activities out of a governmental fund because then you're not capturing the true cost to run those utilities. So the intergovernmental revenue comes in and with grant compliance get placed in the special ARP funds, and then it grants that money to the enterprise funds. So kind of like a transfer in and out. You guys were familiar with that when we had a lot of transfers in and out for funding capital. So it kind of works very similar to that. So what I did on the next page here, and there was a change in accounting standards. So they redefined what agency, or now they're calling them custodial funds, are. So those were funds that we were holding on behalf of third parties. And basically the standards came out and said if you have any administrative involvement on how that revenue is collected or how those expenditures are made, including setting fees, you could no longer consider them custodial. Those custodial funds didn't require a budget. So when we adopted the new standard, there was one fund, developers escrow, that was considered custodial that is no longer meets that definition, so we had to adopt a budget for it. And then the refuse escrow was also reclassified, but we had always had a budget for that, so that just moved into the enterprise funds. So we had like adoption of new standards, grant compliance, and some reclassifications. So looking at just the initial revenues and the comparisons to last year, it looks a little different. So what I did was I kind of stripped all those away to see if none of that had happened. If we didn't have to account for the enterprise funds in the manner that we do related to the ARP grant funds, if we didn't have the reclassification of the special funds, if we didn't have to adopt budgets for previously unadopted funds, this is kind of where we would be looking an increase of revenue of about $175,000 or 0.24%. So just kind of put it in perspective what the adopting those standards and meeting that compliance means. We're now going to jump down to revenue by classification, so expanding that entity-wide or city-wide look into the individual buckets of revenue. So for intergovernmental revenue, you notice that it appears that it's increasing by quite a bit. Again, that's kind of that coming into the ARP grant fund and then consequently being granted to the enterprise funds. So without that, it would have just been an increase of $212,000 or 4%. Some other things to note, as we discussed, we're keeping income tax revenue steady based on adjusted 2021 projections, but we still had those refunds to contend with. So we kept the revenue side flat, but then increased refunds by about 75%. So that's why they see that 1% reduction in income tax, even though we said we were keeping it pretty steady. It's accounting for those potential refunds that could come in. As far as property taxes, that's just determined by the county auditor. They send me a letter that says, here's what we're estimating your property tax collections to be. So they're estimating a 13% increase. For payments in lieu of taxes, that's what the service charges that all of our TIF funds receive. I used county auditor valuation information and effective tax rates, and it calculated a decrease, and I wasn't expecting that based on what they were saying was going to happen to property taxes. So that'll be updated and monitored as we move into 2022, hopefully get some updated valuation information from the county auditor and see if we need to make any adjustments in that area. The other local taxes, which is our lodging tax, we looked at activity through the third quarter of this year, and it really seems to be rebounding quite nicely in the third quarter. So we projected that forward to 2022, and it looks like we'll have an increase in lodging taxes of about 63%. Important to note, though, that this is still below the pre-pandemic level. Pre-pandemic, it was north of $500,000. So we're showing improvement moving into 2022, but not quite where we were before the pandemic. Fines and fees, that was the change for the developers escrow fund, having to adopt a budget for that. And then investment income. So investment income, we turned to our investment advisors. They did a full analysis of what our current holdings are, maturity dates, what inventory they think is going to be available to reinvest in, and where they think rates are going to go. So still no rate hikes expected for 2022. That's more leading into 2023. But they did feel that we would see some increases there based on what they're seeing inventory-wise and what our maturity is. So expecting about a 25% increase in investment income. So now that we've kind of looked at revenue, we'll look at appropriations. We have some of those same things that are impacting the appropriation request, that reclassifications of funds, the ARP, an enterprise fund request, accounting standards, and of course, capital investment. So the initial increase is expected to be $8.1 million or 11%. And then did those same things that I did on the revenue side, was I stripped all those things away and said, okay, if we didn't have to include an expense in the ARP fund to grant the money to the enterprise funds, if we didn't have to budget for those funds that didn't previously require a budget, where would we be? So that drops it to about a $5.8 million increase, or an 8% increase. When we do look at this increase, 65% or $3.8 million is all related to capital. And that'll kind of be apparent on the next slide. So this is our appropriations by classification. You could see that capital outlay number, an increase of $3.8 million. So that's really the majority of that increase that we're seeing. The other areas that are increasing would be salaries and benefits, expected to increase by $1.1 million or 5%. This is based on the following. So the steelworkers contract goes through the end of 2022. So there's already a negotiated 3% increase for them. We have 2 contracts for the police and the dispatchers that will be expiring at the end of 2021. And we put in a 2% increase, but it'll all need to be negotiated. So that was just kind of our best guess at where things may start. And then for unclassified employees, given a cost of living increase of about 2%. And those were just employees that were not part of the compensation study. For those employees that were part of the compensation study, and there was roughly 40 of them, the average increase was about 6% to their pay rates based on those changes that were recommended by Clemens Nelson. We're also requesting to add 16 positions. Again, page 34 in the all fund summary gives the detail of those positions. And then again, too, in each of the departmental sections that begin on page 55, we'll explain those additions that we're asking for. On the contract services side, expecting a 15% increase. Again, part of that is that granting of the ARP money to the enterprise funds. Then we also have some increases for services for water, sewer, refuse. We have requests for an increase for technology. We have new timekeeping and scheduling system coming online. We have a work order and asset management system that we've just started. And we want to make some updates to the city's website. Increases to Parks and Recreation. There's an increase for programming for Price Road. It's anticipated that that'll be open in the fall. And then there's also the Parks Master Plan refresh and Academy Park redesign. And then we also have communication services that are increasing, getting messages out to individuals about all these things and getting people informed. And then, of course, as we discussed, the increase to capital outlay. When it came to the capital, a big portion of that, you're going to see a big increase in the TIF funds. They've been producing quite well, and we had a lot of projects that fit nicely into those TIF districts. So there's an increase about $1.5 million there. along with the ARP requests. So now that we've kind of talked about the citywide aspect, we're going to just kind of focus in on the general fund. A lot of the changes that you're seeing in the general fund were from that citywide change that we already discussed, but we'll hit on some of those things again specific to the general fund. So looking at the top part is revenue. So again, discussing income taxes. We already talked about the pending legal issues with the 2020 withholdings, more potential refunds from 2021, work from home, what could potentially happen. I also wanted to touch base on the updated projection for 2021. So when we were leading into 2021 with all the uncertainties and not kind of knowing what was going to happen, vaccinations still hadn't been rolled out yet. We anticipated a 10% decrease. So our initial projection for 2021 was about 16.8 million, somewhere around there. As we worked through the third quarter, we again started to see some rebound there too. So when we got into the end of September, I kind of projected that through the end of the year, and it looks like we're going to end 2021 at a 5% increase over 2020 versus a 10% decrease. So I went ahead and updated that projection, and it's reflected here. And this is net of refunds of 19.2 million is what we're anticipating through the end of 2021. So kind of leaving that flat into 2022, we got 19.6 million that we're anticipating just on the revenue side, and again, increasing those refunds by about 75%. That equates to about 252,000 more in refunds, which brings us to that 1.3% decrease in income tax revenue that we're anticipating. Again, for the other revenue areas, very much the same as the citywide. We got our projections for property tax from the county auditor. For the lodging tax, did that same thing. Looked at where we were at the third quarter and then just kind of projected that third quarter into 2022. Local government funding. Again, county auditor sent us their statement expecting that to increase by about 13%. So that's that increase in intergovernmental revenue that you're seeing of about 10%. That's mainly driven by the local government fund increases that they're anticipating. Again, investment advisors are expecting an increase in investment income right around 25-26%. The increase in fines and fees and charges for services is directly related to that reclassification of the general services and recreation division back into the general fund. Had those not been reclassified, we would be at about a 1% growth for charges for services and about 2.5% for fines and fees. So again, very little increases we're anticipating as we kind of move into 2022. On the appropriations side, which is your expenditure side, the bottom half of that chart, as a service organization, it makes sense that the majority of our expenditures are in salaries and benefits and contract services. We're expecting an increase in salaries and benefits of about 8%. A portion of this increase, about 41%, is directly related to that reclassification from the special revenue funds. The remaining 59%, or 798,000, is related to the same things that we already discussed. We already know we have a 3% increase for the steelworkers. For the non-steelworking group, our two other union contracts and non-classified that weren't part of the compensation study, we're anticipating a 2% increase. And then we have about 30 employees specific to the general fund that receive that average of about a 6% increase based on the compensation study. Within the general fund, the staffing that we're requesting there is 9 full-time, 1 part-time, and a movement of 1 employee from part-time to full-time. And as far as the full-time employees, 3 part-time positions will not be funded to kind of offset some of that cost. Kind of looking at contract services next, an increase of 28%. 68% of that, or 876, is related to that special revenue movement back into the general fund. The remaining 400,000, or about 32%, is increases for technology services, as we discussed, the asset management system, timekeeping system, scheduler, website redesign. We also have an increase in professional development as we're onboarding new employees, a lot of them at the supervisory level. They're going to need some training. We also have an increase for recruitment costs and marketing. Again, tight labor market. We want to get the best to come. We got to market for them. We got to make sure we're testing appropriately to bring those employees on. Also, the recreation programming for Price Road, the Parks and Rec Master Plan refresh. There's some additional costs that we're anticipating relating to the new emergency communication center, and then just overall communication services, including the website redesign. All the remaining appropriations are estimated to remain relatively consistent. You'll see an increase on the materials and supply side. That, again, was related to that reclassification of those special funds back into the general fund. So kind of hitting on all the revenues and expenditures, what does this mean for our fund balance? Oh, first wanted to give you a breakdown of kind of where we are on the revenue and expense side and what drives the majority of it. So as you can see, the income tax is still our largest revenue source at 73%, followed by real estate taxes. And then showing on the appropriation side, what services are driving the majority of those appropriations. So we have public safety, followed by parks and recreation and public service. Those larger outward-facing departments make sense that they drive the majority of the appropriations. In looking at the general fund requests and the impact on fund balance, planned revenue and appropriations results in a request to use about $1.2 million of unreserved general fund balance. This is within the policy that was just recently amended by council in March, Ordinance 0010 in 2021. So we meet this policy by maintaining an emergency reserve equivalent to the 25% of operating expenditures, and it retains more than the required 2 months of operating expenditures in unreserved fund balance. We're actually projecting to have twice that, or 4 months of unreserved fund balance, even with using a portion of that. So now that we've kind of talked about the general fund and what we're requesting there, we're going to take a quick look at capital. So as mentioned previously, we're refreshing the strategic plan. We're getting a capital improvement plan put together. So for 2022, what we did was we followed what our normal process was. We analyzed the capital needs assessment. We looked at priority ones, priority twos, things that meet the strategic plan. And then if we had additional resources, we kind of looked at items that maybe weren't of high priority and maybe not in line with the strategic plan, but it was still a benefit or something that the residents would see value in, or was important for economic growth. So on the capital maintenance side, which is what I have up there now, for governmental funds, we're anticipating to spend about $7.7 million just on maintaining what we have. No real big difference from this list compared to previous years. On the enterprise fund side, for capital maintenance, anticipating to spend about $993,000. Again, nothing really new here. Those same capital maintenance items that we need for equipment and our utility infrastructure. The next listing of items that I have up there is what we're requesting for capital improvements or additions. Just from the capital improvement fund, requesting right around $5 million. You can see them all kind of listed out there. And then here's where we have the tax increment or TIF fund projects that we identified. And then also the ARP funds. This particular set of projects under the ARP funds are the non-proprietary related capital. So you'll see the proprietary projects listed in that listing, and it'll have ARP funded next to it. So on the governmental side, requesting close to $7.3 million in capital improvements. On the proprietary or enterprise fund side, you could see those ARP funded items with ARP listed after them, and then some other items that we're requesting for 2022, totaling close to $2.8 million requested for enterprise or proprietary fund capital. So just to kind of hit on the American Rescue Plan and kind of what we looked at as an administration and wanted to bring forward to request. So we received the first $1.8 million in July. You'll remember there was a supplemental appropriation to use a small portion of that as loss in revenue. We'll get another $1.8 million July of 2022. And this is kind of what we've identified for 2022 through 2024. But I just wanted to make sure that it was clear that you're only approving the 2022 appropriations. We kind of put this out as our plan. It could change, and then as we move into those out years, that's when you would actually be appropriating or authorizing those. But just kind of wanted to show as an administration where we're requesting to use those funds as we moved in through those years. Also on page 187 of your budget book, it gives more information on each of these and how it meets the requirements of the ARP guidelines. The final things that we'll walk through are the 3 special revenue funds, so the public safety, parks and recreation, and public service. So for the public safety fund, we're going to have a slight decrease in income tax revenue. Some of that is a refund related. The other portion of that is that reallocation of income tax among those 3 funds. On the expenditure side, we're expecting an increase. This is driven by the 2% anticipated for union wages, and then we're also requesting the addition of a community liaison officer. Transfers out, you'll see a jump there. That's all related to the police pension fund. So we have a small levy that comes in to help support the cost of the police pension. Previously, it would be subsidized by the general fund, but now we're using public safety dollars to go ahead and fund that pension for the police. So it increases as wages do, since it's a percentage of the wages. On the Parks and Recreation Fund side, again, we have a little bit of reclassification going on, which is changing charges for services. We're anticipating an increase in income tax. So as we discussed early on in 2021, we started the year with a pretty large on-reserve fund balance, so we were able to use some of that fund balance, so we didn't have to allocate as much. But as we're moving into 2022, we've kind of used up that additional on-reserve fund balance. So we had to have a little bit more income tax going in there to support the Parks and Recreation Fund. Expenditures are showing a decrease. Again, it's related to that reclassification. And then a new item that's being requested from the Parks and Recreation Fund is adding a part-time marketing and communications coordinator. And then finally, as we look at the Public Service Fund, again, we have a slight decrease, mainly related to the reclassification, and on the income tax side, it's the refunds plus a reallocation based on the activities that are flowing through there. We're expecting expenditures to decrease based on that reclassification of general services. And then new items that we're requesting for 2022 is the addition of an administrative assistant for engineering and a development engineer. Finally, wanted to just bring up the important dates moving forward. So the 25th, which was last Monday, delivered the budget book. Today, having our formal presentation. And then each committee will have discussion based on questions that come in from council that the administration will address. So with that, that concludes my presentation, and I'd be happy to take any comments or questions you might have.
Anyone from council have anything at this time?
I think we all, that was a pretty wonderful study that you just gave us. That very helpful.
Great.
Not appearing. We will continue. Moving to item E, the consent agenda. Is there a motion to adopt the consent agenda?
So moved. Second.
Moved by Mr. Schnetzer, seconded by Mr. Renner. Roll call?
Schnetzer?
Yes.
Renner?
Yes.
Bowers? Yes. Lyric?
Yes.
McGregor?
Yes.
Angelou?
Yes.
Motion carries. We have item section F, ordinance for introduction and first reading. Is there a request to enter these items under first reading?
Mr. President, I'll introduce the items under Section F.
Thank you. Item G, ordinance for emergency adoption. We have ordinance 0060-2021, an ordinance to adopt a moratorium on applications for and the granting of building permits and certificates of occupancy for any building, structure, or use or change of use that would enable the cultivation, processing, distribution, or sale of medical marijuana for a period not to exceed 1 year to declare an emergency. Is there a motion to adopt with emergency ordinance 0060-2021?
So moved. Second.
Moved by Mr. Renner, seconded by Mr. Schnetzer. Any discussion?
Yes, thank you.
Ms. Bowers?
Okay. We've had great discussions on this topic over the last several weeks, and I'm grateful especially to Attorney Lloyd Pierre-Louis, who was introduced by Councilwoman Angelou, and who happened to be here. He's an attorney whose practice is focused in governmental affairs, administrative law, and particularly the legal cannabis and hemp industries. He spoke up when he didn't have to, and I am greatly appreciative of it, about the regulatory framework experienced by his clients in the medical marijuana and particularly dispensary industry. In 2016, the state of Ohio passed laws to regulate the industry of medical marijuana and permit its operations. In the 5 years since, our neighboring communities have not reported significant concerns with these businesses operating in their communities, and the state has recently expanded the number of licenses for dispensaries. In 2018, Gahanna passed a 1-year moratorium to prevent the opening of dispensaries and claimed that research and information gathering would occur during the moratorium. Once that moratorium lapsed, the issue was effectively moot because more dispensary licenses were not available until earlier this year. As discussed, this is a highly regulated industry with many checkpoints to ensure public safety. The licensees are motivated to maintain their licenses and protect their investments, coupled with state requirements and heavy regulation and oversight. It appears from the state's actions to expand licenses, other communities' acceptance of these businesses, and the lack of negative reporting that the regulatory scheme is working as intended. As with all consumer-facing businesses, some are set up in locations that are less than ideal for traffic flow. Whether it's an ice cream shop with the best Switzer or a new brewery with a special theme night, parking and traffic flow can be impacted by any business, as we see in our own neighborhoods. We're a resilient and business-ready community, though, and that can and should adapt with and seek to reasonably accommodate small businesses that drive jobs and serve our residents. As discussed earlier in this process, the timeline from licensure to doors opening spans 9 months or more. With applicants submitting to the state this month, they may qualify for provisional licenses in January. They then have 270 days to meet state regulations to open doors, and this was according to the information provided by Attorney Louis Pierre. This builds in an extended timeline for us to review appropriate local ordinances, such as the notice requirement that was brought up, or a private security detail obligation that might be appropriate to set the guardrails that Mr. Louis Pierre so eloquently addressed. Ultimately, though, it's tempting to phrase this as just extending time. This really does have the impact of effectively barring dispensaries. Because the licensing window will pass while this is in effect, if passed, the moratorium will have the effect of prohibiting medical marijuana businesses in this round of licensing. I am opposed to a moratorium in any respect because, one, medical marijuana businesses do not pose a significant risk to safety. Two, medical marijuana businesses create jobs and have a positive economic impact. And three, they provide important treatment that can reduce ailments of certain medical conditions. However, because of the concerns raised by Mr. Renner, I would offering the following motion to amend sections 2 and 3 of the proposed ordinance, specifically striking the words cultivation, processing, distribution, or, and instead retaining retail, sale, or dispensing. So the phrasing would read, or change of use that would enable the retail, sale, or dispensing of medical marijuana in the city of Gahanna.
Sorry, Ms. Bowers, just for clarity, you're reading which line, what section?
Section 2 and Section 3.
Thank you.
Section 2 specifically would strike the words cultivation, processing, distribution, or, and instead retain retail, sale, or dispensing of. And I would, my motion to amend would amend both that language in Sections 2 and Section 3. Thank you.
So just, again, for clarification, you've finished your comments and you have made a motion to make that amendment?
Yes.
Okay, so before we continue, Madam Clerk, do you have the details of the amendment?
I have what you wanted to strike through, but can you repeat what you wanted to include instead?
Yeah, the language would be then, starting with the phrase change of use in Sections 2 and 3, in Section 2, change of use that would enable the retail, sale, or dispensing of medical marijuana in the city of Gahanna. And in Section 3, the language would read, that would establish the retail, sale, or dispensing of medical marijuana for the duration of the moratorium.
Can you repeat that last one? That would establish the retail.
Sale, or dispensing.
Thank you.
Could you repeat them all again, please?
Section 2,
Actually, if the clerk could do that, that way
Thank
we
you.
know that she has what you're intending.
Well, I do need you to repeat it again, please. Not the last one, the first one. Change of use that would enable dispensary or dispensing.
change of use that would enable the retail, sale, or dispensing of medical marijuana.
Thank you.
And Madam Clerk, if you could go through that end to end, just so that we have full clarity before we continue.
Just one moment here. Let me pull this up.
And if you would simply make it as amended as opposed to any delete and add.
Okay. I'm just waiting on the Wi-Fi.
Mr. Chair,
1 second.
Okay, Marissa? Can you email that to me?
Yes,
That would
ma'am.
make it very easy for me to copy and paste.
Do you want the red line or no?
You can send that, that's fine.
And there is no comma between retail and sale, which matters.
You never know.
It does matter.
Mr. President, would you like me to read each section in its entirety?
Yes, please.
As amended?
Yes, please.
Section 2, that this council establishes a moratorium and the acceptance of any application for or the granting of any building permits or certificates of occupancy for any building, structure, use, expansion of use, or change of use that would enable the retail sale or dispensing of medical marijuana in the city of Gahanna for a period of 1 year from the date of adoption of this ordinance by the council. Section 3, that no existing business in the city of Gahanna may expand in any way that would establish the retail sale or dispensing of medical marijuana for the duration of the moratorium period established hereby.
One question, just with language. Would it be appropriate to not have in your amendment retail?
So my thought process on including the word retail was that if we were to have, and I understand the perhaps unlikeliness of this, but that if we were to have a wholesaler or a processing facility or a cultivator here, that I would anticipate that they would wholesale sell their product. And the intent of this, I think, from the read of council throughout our discussions, was that we wanted to curtail the dispensaries, retail dispensaries to consumers, because that was the underlying basis of concern.
We have a motion on the table. Does anyone in council have any further questions about the language? Just about the language. I just want to make sure that is solidified because we do not have a motion active on the table until there is a second. I just want to make sure the language is clear.
I'd like to say then processing and cultivation and distribution would remain.
Those would be allowed, except for distribution. Distribution
I'm
is,
sorry, cultivation and processing.
Those are stricken.
they come out of this language, which allows them should they come forward. This is a moratorium,
That's
so
what I'm
any,
saying, they are allowed to be
They
there.
would be allowed.
That's what I meant to say, I'm sorry. We're talking moratorium, okay. And so that's the same on cultivation, processing, on both of those. So those could go ahead.
it is possible.
So they can plant it on the front of their house.
No.
No.
I'm just kidding.
Okay. We have a motion on the table as read, and everyone on council, as I understand it, is clear on what that language says. Is there a second?
Mr. President, I'll second that. I want to thank Councilwoman Barrows for identifying about my concerns, and I assume others, about the sale of the dispensaries at the consumer level. I think also from what we've heard, cultivation and processing is probably not going to be an imminent thing that's going to happen inside Gahanna, so I really don't think this takes some of the risk out. So I second it.
Thank you. We have a motion and a second. Any discussion on the amendment? Mr. Schnetzer.
Thank you, Mr. President. Yeah, I guess what I was going to say in regards to the original legislation, it applies here as well to the proposed modification to the language, is that my thoughts on this, as far as a vote, have nothing to do with, it should not be interpreted as being for or against the concept of medical marijuana. It is in direct response to the administration's request that they be allowed time to perform the requisite due diligence to look at the zoning code and to make sure that any of these uses are consistent with the community, and so I guess I would not be in favor of changing this because it would seem that the administration would review all of the above processes. So I don't want to, I guess, implicitly support one or the other without allowing the administration the like I said, requisite time to perform the due diligence that they've requested.
Any further discussion on the amendment? Mr. Renner.
Well, it's not necessarily on the amendment, so.
Any further discussion on the amendment that's on the table? Roll call.
Bowers?
Yes?
Brenner?
Yes.
McGregor?
Yes.
Schnetzer?
No.
Angelou?
No.
Lyric?
No. 1,
Fails.
2, 3, 1, 2, 3. Motion fails on a tie. At this time, we have on the table a motion and a second for the legislation as originally written. Is there any discussion on this legislation?
Mr. Chair.
Mr. Renner.
I do have, our city attorney let us know that if we wanted to mirror exactly the verbiage that's at a revised code, I think he said that we should probably want to consider adding testing as well to this. Did I remember that? So I would like, yeah, then therefore, I think we should actually add testing to both clauses.
So if you would move to amend with
I
specific
move to
language.
amend.
With specific language.
On both on section 2 and section 3, that you add to the list, include testing.
Madam Clerk, what I would probably suggest is prior to the word cultivation in section 2 and prior to the word cultivation in section 3 to insert testing, comma.
I can add that. I believe the city attorney's exact words were laboratory testing. I don't know if that matters, but
That is what I said, that's what was in the statute, but testing also works. But
Mr. Renner?
Laboratory testing is what the statute says.
Yes, what he said.
Laboratory testing.
He's the attorney.
And I'm sorry, Mr. Renner, if you would just repeat your motion.
So I'm making a motion to add in both in section 2 and 3, after would enable the cultivation, processing, laboratory testing, distribution, or sale of medical marijuana in the city of Gahanna.
Are you good?
you said add it before cultivation. Where did you say to add it?
After processing.
Okay.
Which one is the correct one?
Mr. Renner's making the motion, so he can put it where he wishes,
Oh, okay, thank you.
unless the city attorney has a reason to put it elsewhere.
I do not, either one works.
Thank you.
It is his motion, as you said.
Okay, I've got it.
And if you could read it, please.
Okay. Section 2, that this council establishes a moratorium on the acceptance of any application for or the granting of any building permits or certificates of occupancy for any building, structure use, expansion of use, or change of use that would enable the cultivation, processing, laboratory testing, distribution, or sale of medical marijuana in the city of Gahanna for a period of 1 year from the date of adoption of this ordinance by the council. And Section 3, that no existing business in the city of Gahanna may expand in any way that would establish the cultivation, processing, laboratory testing, distribution, or sale of medical marijuana for the duration of the moratorium period established hereby.
Mr. Renner, is that correct to your motion?
That is
Your amendment?
correct. That is my motion.
Any questions from council with regard to the language? Any discussion with regard to the amendment?
I'd like to have a discussion, only a small discussion on.
Oh, I'm sorry. Hold on 1 second. Is there a second with regard to the motion on the table by Mr. Renner? Seconded by Mrs. McGregor. So we have a motion to amend as stated by Mr. Renner, a second by Mrs. McGregor. Any discussion on the amendment that is on the table? Mrs. Angelou?
Well, it's not on the amendment.
Okay.
Go ahead.
Any further discussion with regard to the amendment that has been motioned and seconded?
I guess I'm a little, sorry, Mr. President.
Go ahead.
Thank you. I'm a little surprised that we're going kind of in the opposite direction, especially when laboratory testing would ostensibly bring science-based, high-paying jobs to this region if it was so pursued. So that's the only comment I have.
Certainly.
Thank you.
Thank you. Any further discussion with regard to the amendment? Roll call.
Renner?
Yes.
McGregor?
Yes.
Schnetzer?
Yes.
Angelou?
Yes.
Bowers?
No.
Lyric?
Yes. Motion carries. At this time, we have on the agenda or on the table a motion to adopt the amended legislation as just passed, with the amendment that was just passed. Any discussion on this legislation? Mrs. Angelou.
I would hope that we would have enough time within the first few months, maybe, and try not to go past 6 months to be able to come in, and that would help what Marissa was trying to say. I think that we need that amount of time. The administration said they want that amount of time. Let's make it a year. We can always take it back, but I hope that it is discussed quickly so that we can do what we want to do then.
Any further discussion on the motion? Mr. Schnetzer.
Just repeat my sentiments from earlier that regardless of the language, my response to the roll call in a couple of seconds here is in no way should be reflective of thoughts on this topic of medical marijuana. It is simply in response to the administration's request, again, for more time to allow for the necessary due diligence to make sure that this is a good fit for the city, and if it is, where it is. So that's all.
Thank you. Any further discussion? Roll call.
Renner?
Yes.
Schnetzer?
Yes.
McGregor?
Yes.
Angelou?
Yes.
Bowers?
No.
Lyric?
Yes. Motion carries with emergency. Ordinances for second reading and adoption. We have Ordinance 0064-2021, an ordinance authorizing the mayor to enter into agreement with Vonage Business, Inc. to provide unified communications as a service. Is there a motion to adopt Ordinance 0064-2021?
So moved.
Moved by Mr. Renner. Is there a second?
Second.
Seconded by Mrs. Angelou. Any discussion on Ordinance 0064-2021?
I guess
Mrs.
I have a
Angelou?
question. Was this the least amount of money to go into this particular thing? Was this?
Yes, I'm actually going to refer to Mr. Schultz, as he's the one who oversaw, along with
you.
the committee that he formed.
Just want to make sure because we've had the one that we're not taking.
Correct.
So this was the middle. The low was about, if I'm remembering correctly, about $11,000 less than this particular bid that we went with. But we didn't feel that that particular company met the qualifications of the proposal.
Thank you.
Any further discussion on Ordinance 0064-2021? Roll call.
Renner?
Yes.
Angelou?
Yes.
McGregor?
Yes.
Schnetzer?
Yes.
Bowers?
Yes.
Lyric?
Yes. Motion carries. Correspondence and actions. Madam Clerk?
Attached to your agenda packets is a liquor permit request for Mi Tradicion. There's been a stock transfer. There's no objections from the police department. And just as a reminder, unless there are objections from council, if you do nothing, then they'll be permitted to move forward with the liquor permit.
Thank you. Council, Mid-Ohio Regional Planning Commission. Karen, do you have this topic?
I received this on the 30th. There was actually 2 letters. One was sent to Mayor Jadwin and one was sent to me. But it has to do with the fact that the email, we got an email about Morpsey, and it was from Eileen Luby, which speaks to the return on investment. So, because when we join Morpsey, we pay for how many people there are in the community. And Gahanna's ROI is $66 for each $1 that we have sent to them. So this is a good thing, and I wanted it to come out so that other people could see it, all the things that are happening at Morpsey, but also that we are getting a good return on investment.
Thank you. Moving to item J, representatives of the Community Improvement Corporation. no report this evening for the CIC. Our next meeting will be after our next regular meeting. Mid-Ohio Regional Planning Commission, Mrs. Angelo?
We have a meeting on Thursday, which is for not for the commission, and then the next Thursday will be a commission meeting.
Thank you. And the Convention and Visitors Bureau, Mr. Leesburg's not here this evening. I've got a few notes. Visit Gahanna hosted the second annual Creekside Pumpkin Crawl last Wednesday evening. There were approximately 400 people, or there were over 400 people in attendance, about twice the amount of last year, and also the amount of pumpkin entries doubled from 2020. Many Creekside businesses also participated by offering specials, decorating pumpkins, and donating gift cards to the winners of the pumpkin contest. The next event of the Visit Gahanna is going to be the Holiday Lights event on Sunday, November 21st from 4 to 6 p.m. Additional details are forthcoming. Passports for the fall edition of the Herbal Cocktail Trail were released last week, and there are 6 participating establishments this season. Visit Gahanna and the Ohio Herb Center partnered with Give to Gahanna for their annual pumpkin sale by offering space on the front porch, yard, and collecting donations. Previously, the Gahanna Area Arts Council made pumpkins available at their former location next to the Herb Center. And that is what I have for notes from the Convention and Visitors Bureau, or Visit Gahanna, as it's better known. And School Board, Mr. Schnetzer.
Nothing this evening, Mr. President. Thank you.
Official reports, Madam Mayor.
Yes, thank you. First of all, the written mayor's report will be sent later. I had one more section to finish, and unfortunately did not get that finished before 6 o'clock, so I will be sending that to you tomorrow morning, and would ask the clerk to affix that as well under mayor's report. Thank you. Just a couple of talking points. The end of last week, we welcomed a brand new business called The Sauce at their grand opening. They're located in the former Smash Burger location right over here at Clark Hall. Really a fantastic business. It is a business based in Northeast Ohio, and they selected Gahanna as their first Central Ohio location. So if you have not yet been there, food is fantastic. Pop on over there and give them a great Gahanna welcome. All of you should have received an email invitation earlier today for ED 101, Economic Development 101 event scheduled for next Tuesday, November 9th, right here in this very room at City Hall. An invitation went out for in-person registration to council members, planning commission members, CIC members, as well as school board members and school administration staff. Topics will be talking about trends in economic development incentives, how Gahanna is responding to the regional growth, et cetera. And guest speakers will be Dr. Kirsten Carr of MORPC, the MORPC's Director of Planning and Sustainability, as well as Justin Bickle, a former Gahanna resident who is currently the Managing Director for Client Services and Project Management at One Columbus. Both of them, along with our Economic Development Director, Nate Strum, will be the speaking panel. There will also be a live streaming opportunity, but certainly we want to allow for in-person seating reservations first. So please respond by the end of the day Wednesday, and then we will be sharing and making that link public for the residents and other business members to attend as well. We currently have an opening for dispatchers within our public safety department. We are 2 vacant positions in an already understaffed team over there. And just to give you a sense of what that job is, I think we all know for National First Responders Day was last week, and dispatchers really are the first touch point for anyone in an emergency situation when they call 911. Their job is critical to ensuring effective and timely response from both fire and police. In the month of September, they responded to 887 calls in an average time of 4.7 seconds. Which is really amazing, especially given the fact that there are 2 people down, and over 2,200 calls from the non-emergency line as well. So that position is posted at Gahanna.gov under Find a Job, and if you know anybody who is looking for a really exciting and important career where you can truly affect the lives of others, we would love to have them apply for that position. Veterans Day is next Thursday. City Hall will be closed in observance of the holiday. The Veterans Committee has organized a Veterans Day ceremony at 11 a.m. over at Veterans Memorial Park, so all of you and the members of the public are invited to attend that. And then finally, tomorrow is Election Day. We have several charter amendments on the ballot. There's a link on the homepage that explains, has a great chart that explains the current version, provides a red line version, and what the proposed new version, so you can compare side by side, and provides actually the reasoning that the Charter Review Commission made for recommending those changes. And obviously, we have very important positions on the ballot for tomorrow, and certainly having the opportunity and the right to vote is something that is really the hallmark of democracy in our country. And I always believe that your voice is the loudest at the local level, because it's the local government that most directly affects your lives on a daily basis. So we hope that everyone who has not yet had a chance to early vote will show up tomorrow to vote. And I wish all of you very good luck and wish you well tomorrow. That's all I have. Thank you.
Thank you. City Attorney? Mr. Malarkey?
Nothing this evening, thank you.
Just want to say, you seem to be moving a little better than last time.
Didn't even have my cane, my first night out without a cane, so.
Very good. Thank you. Council comment. Mrs. Angelou.
My husband and I went over to the Mifflin Township Ops Center, and because first of all, I had to do something there, but it was so wonderful to see the things that are happening in that building. And I went to the dispatchers areas where our dispatchers for police will be working in no time. I think some December something it will happen, and they were bringing in all of the incredible things that were going to, the state-of-the-art equipment. And it was so wonderful to see this thing really coming forward, and it's just a wonderful opportunity for collaboration. I was surprised to see, though, that there was a wing of the large ops center that was there, my husband said, for non-patrol officers. And so I asked Jeff Spence today if he could just give us a little bit more about this, because I don't think we knew about it. So.
Thank you. So between police staff and Kevin, who keeps us on track, we're moving this project along. The communication center piece, a portion of our project is also an upgrade of our 911 system. This was a planned upgrade that we knew was coming down the road for us, but it's a very intricate project when you factor that in with the build out of a communications center, because when it comes to 911 and radio transmissions, all those things, we have to make sure that not only all the systems are integrated and they function properly, but that there are many fail-safes. And as far as the other space, we're going to move some of our investigative staff, our investigative services subdivision, over to kind of the other side of the building on the back half of the second floor. The space that those investigators currently operate out of was originally built as part of the building expansion in 1992. It housed 3 people, and we now have 11 in there. So we're flat out of room. This section on the second floor will give us some much needed breathing room while we work on our overall facility needs. So speaking with the mayor over the last few weeks, and also our safety director, it's our intent as we kind of get very close to a finished product over there to give council an opportunity to walk through, ask questions, and we're hoping to do that. Again, we're getting ready within about the next 2 weeks, and I'll have Kevin correct me if I'm off in my timing, to begin basically the live testing of all of our systems. And that'll proceed for a couple of weeks. That's where we'll test all of our 911, our radio communications, our CAD system, our computer-aided dispatch system, all of our software integration. And it looks like we will be the first ones to move over, and then the MEC dispatchers will follow on a couple of weeks later. So again, going back to discussions with the mayor and the safety director, we do plan on bringing council over and having a kind of a tour and a Q&A to see everything in a live environment. So Karen, thank you very much, and more to follow as we kind of work through all this this delicate dance of making sure everything works properly.
And it truly is a really amazing place. It's very large, and it was just something that I thought we should probably know, and thank you for giving us that information.
I just wanted to, in terms of the actual size, there are, the building is, or the communication center has 14 seats. 7 of those are PD and 7 of those are fire and EMS. We are building out 5 seats on each side of the room, and then we will have some expansion training workstations that will follow on later. But when we turn the center up, there will be 10 dispatching stations
I
within
have some photos here.
within the center.
If anybody wants to see them, it's quite amazing what's happening. So, and we got this last week, was it? It was last week? It says here that this is a planning study, and it was October 22nd of 2021 is when this was finished by Pizzuti. What was the cost on this? Do you know what?
I don't know off the top of my head because it actually began under previous administration. We have not.
It was not Pizzuti though then, am I correct?
Pizzuti was engaged by prior administration. They were in the midst of it and it had stalled at the time. Back in 2019, there was a number of staff people who left. When I came into office last year, I discovered that it was there, and we picked it up and contacted Pizzuti about finishing out the work for which they had been contracted. So that was what that was. So I can look up what prior administration, what that had been, but off the top of my head, I don't know.
Okay, because again, this was sort of like interesting to find, and it seems as though it's got some parts that were older than others potentially.
And that was part of the history that I know when that was presented to council October 23rd,
We may
maybe?
want to have this as a committee discussion as a part of
Yes.
the, or in the overall.
Yes, we are, but I just wanted to find out what the cost of this. If you could let me know, I would appreciate.
Sure, and I know that I think we're working on scheduling a facilities workshop or special committee meeting, whatever.
One for the 15th?
15th, yes, and I believe the history and the details of the history as we led up to the report that you now have in your hand will be part of that presentation.
Thank you. Thank you. I want to wish everybody that's running for office good luck, and hopefully we'll have a wonderful council, and we'll have a wonderful school system and all these things, and the judges will be coming out. And it's really interesting because you think this is easy to run a campaign, and then you run it and it isn't. So for anybody that wants to ever do this, always think about the fact that it takes a whole lot of stuff. And we are so, rubber meets the road. When you have to go to your neighbors and tell them something, you kind of want them to vote for you, and hopefully they do. So I wish everybody the best.
Thank you. Ms. Bowers.
Yeah, thank you. Again, I'll just make the point again. Hopefully everyone gets out to vote if you haven't voted already. It's incredibly important. I always like to say that when my grandmother was born, women didn't have the right to vote, and it is even more critically important that we remember that enfranchisement is not universal, and that we should not take it for granted. And good luck to everyone. I think we're very blessed in this community to have an active democracy, and it's really great to see the active races this year. So make sure you honor their sacrifice in the fact that they've put themselves out there to run and represent us by voting. One last point I just want to make is that November is National Native American Heritage Month. This month we recognize the contributions, achievements, and sacrifices of Native American people, the first inhabitants of the United States. It's also a time to celebrate their rich and vibrant culture. With that, I hope everyone had a great Halloween and wishes for a happy November.
Thank you. Mr. Renner.
Yes, thank you. I just wanted to applaud the students that are here, that are joining us tonight. You've heard actually some unprecedented talk in terms of the facilities planning. You sat through a very long budget presentation, and I commend you for that. But the other thing, though, is the take-home is that beginning this fall, we have a lot of unprecedented discussions here in Gahanna, most notably about our facilities. So pay attention to the news about that and the deliberations that are going forth on that. Then I just want to echo all the comments about getting out to vote. Voting is one of our sacred rights as Americans to go out and actually cast that vote. It is your right to actually run for elected office. I am on the ballot, and going out and into the neighborhoods and talking to constituents is always a very refreshing thing to do. And you hear people's views. You hear some things that are pretty negative about yourself. You hear some things that are pretty positive about yourself. But you also hear differences of opinions, which is really, I think we're forgetting in this national dialogue why we come together to form a community and get together, hash it out, mediate in a very positive and respectful manner, and then go forward with life. So with that, I wish all the candidates good luck, and I hope the public, it turns out very heavily, because voting, again, is a very sacred right in our democracy. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Schnetzer.
Nothing this evening, Mr. President.
Mrs. McGregor.
This past 2 Wednesdays, two newer members of the Historical Society did a cemetery walk. It wasn't really like a scary thing. It was more like in the older section of Mifflin Cemetery. And they just talked about tombstone symbols, and they did some about mourning traditions. And they talked about some of the people that were buried in the area. And they advertised it on social media and sold out in 6 hours. They only allowed 15 people per tour because they weren't sure how it would go. And so it was. I went over and took some pictures and listened for a while. They really did a great job. They were in period costume and they had lanterns, and they walked the second week it was darker than the first week. And then Sunday, Jim and I went to Green Lawn Cemetery. I grew up in Columbus and spent most of my life here. Never been to Green Lawn Cemetery. And it was just a wonderful place. I know a lot of people go there to bird. And we just on a quick tour, we were there probably a couple hours, but we counted at least 18 species of trees. The monuments were beautiful. They're varied. Some of them are incredibly detailed. There was one section we ran across, and we didn't go to all the sections by far, but there was one called Babyland, and there were lots of small cemeteries, lots of small tombstones that indicated that tiny humans were buried there. There was a section for veterans of the Spanish-American War, which it was really quite a large section, and you don't really think too much about being a veteran of the Spanish-American War. People around here don't talk about that too much. There were a lot of Columbus well-known names. We saw Schettinger, Wolfe, Tibbets, Poindexter. There was a marker on his grave. He was a black man who lived in the Columbus in the early 20th century, I guess, and was actually a council member at one time. I kind of forget which. It was in the early part of the 1900s, but he was a council member, and I think Poindexter Village was named after him. So anyway, if you've never gone, I'd encourage you to go. It's really it's a pretty incredible place. And that's all. Thanks.
Thank you. With that, I also want to thank the students for coming this evening. A little bit longer meeting than normal, but there's been a great deal of debate, a lot of discussion that there may be questions about. More than happy for, not to speak for every member of council, but typically all of us are more than willing to answer any questions or spend a few minutes and see what questions you may have. Mayor and city attorney typically as well. Again, can't speak for them, but usually that's the case. So by all means, step up, and more than happy to answer any questions. With that, I'm sorry, we do have executive session this evening under 5.40A. I'm not going to read the entirety. I am going to note that it is with regard to the consideration of the appointment of the appointment, employment, dismissal, discipline, promotion, demotion, or compensation of a public employee. And there's additional detail to it that I can read if anybody wishes. Is there a motion to go into executive session under 5.40A?
So moved.
Moved by Mr. Schnetzer. Is there a second?
Second.
Second by Mrs. McGregor. Any discussion? Roll call.
Schnetzer?
Yes.
McGregor?
Yes.
Renner?
Yes.
Angelou?
Yes.
Bowers?
Yes.
Lyric?
Yes. Motion carries. Council members, and we'll step into the library. And